Welcome back to the Free Code Camp podcast. I'm Quincy Larson, teacher and founder of freeCodeCamp.org. Today, we are talking with Joe Attardi. He is a software engineer and a prolific author of programming books. Joe, how's the summer over there in Boston?
Hasn't really gotten started yet. We're dealing with a nor'easter right now. It's in the 40s and rainy.
All right, that's 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty darn cold.
Yes.
It's like practically 0 degrees in Celsius.
Yeah.
And for our international audience, Joe, I'm so stoked to talk with you because you've been in the industry for a long time. You've been here
Oh,
like
yes.
21 years.
Yep.
And you've done a lot of stuff, and we're gonna delve into that. You've risen through the ranks, and you have just built a really broad skill set. So we're going to talk about how software development has changed over the past 21 years. We're going to talk about tips for surviving AI's sweeping changes to the field. And I know you're in on like what's going on with AI, and you've talked a little bit about it on social media. We're going to talk about the evolving role of computer science degrees. You yourself are a computer science degree holder. You've kind of seen kind of like how they've waxed and waned in popularity among hiring managers. We're going to talk about why people should still read O'Reilly style programming books printed on dead trees. Again, you're working on your fourth O'Reilly style book. And I'm hyped to hear about all that.
All right. Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
First, I want to start off with like acknowledging that you have the skills, the experience to potentially be a founding CTO at a tech company. If you wanted to get into startups, you have, as I said, risen through the ranks as a dev. You worked with a broad array of different tools. You are renowned for your writing and things like that. You're listed as a public figure when I Google you.
I like that.
Yeah, but you have zero interest in being a founding CTO or doing anything related to like startups or entrepreneurship. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I thought I did, but I felt I was trying to force it, and it just wasn't really. I wasn't feeling it, and I lack some of the skill set. I don't have, the kind of marketing side of things, business side of things. I'm not very good at it, and I'm not too interested in it, to be honest. So I think being on the technical side is where I fit best.
Well, in Boston, there's so many startups being funded. And do you think that devs feel a pressure when they get to a certain point in their career to like go out and do something entrepreneurial?
I certainly did, but although it wasn't anything local, it was mostly seeing, people on Twitter, all this building in public, and it seems like everybody now is building a SaaS on the side. So
Yeah.
I kind of got caught up in that, but I never got past the idea stage. I racked my brain for so long trying to think of a good idea, and I probably overthought it a bit, but I finally just realized, you know what, I'm just going to focus on staying employable as a dev and working that angle.
Yeah. And we're going to get into some of the projects that you do because you do a lot of projects. Obviously, you write these books on various topics like CSS. And you also contribute to open source, and we'll delve into some of your open source successes over the years as well. But I think it is notable that you're just like content working
I
as,
am
a staff engineer for, or what's your exact title? I know you've risen
principal
like
engineer.
principal engineer,
Yeah.
which for people that are not familiar with like kind of like software development job descriptions, like how high up is that?
I mean, it's slightly different at every company. At my company, it's basically below architect level. It's like the step before that.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
there's like engineer, senior engineer, staff engineer, principal engineer, at least at my company.
Yeah. Very cool. And you could be working with SaaS. I just want to be clear because there are a lot of people out there who think that like, are you primarily like an IC, like an individual
Yes.
contributor? Are
Yep, totally.
you see? Do you manage anybody?
No.
Wow. So you've managed for
Just me.
21 years
Yep.
into your career to not have somebody say, "Hey, could you, take over this department or something like
Yeah,
that?"
nope, not yet. I don't
And
know if that reflects on my skills or I've just been lucky, but I don't know.
yeah, I mean, you like being just an IC and focusing on engineering problems.
Yeah, I do. I'm not really interested in any kind of management stuff. It's not for me.
That's cool. So I just want to compliment like knowing kind of like where your interests lie and being able to focus on those, just focusing on the engineering. And because I do think that a lot of people feel pressure like, oh, I've got to get involved in management, or I've got to go back to school and get my MBA, or I've got to like launch some successful project or something like that in order to continue to stay relevant and ascend within this organization.
Yeah.
In your work, have you felt pressure to do that?
No, I think the only pressure I felt has been from myself, as I'm not getting any younger, and it seems like a lot of, developers as they get older sometimes do go into more management type roles, escape the grind. But I haven't felt any external pressure for that really. I feel well supported. I have felt well supported at all my recent companies as I've gotten further in my career to keep going the path I'm going.
Awesome. Do you think that that's representative of do you think that many developers out there, they're like, maybe 25, 30 million people working, developing software for their living? Do you think that that's something that a lot of people can enjoy? Like when you talk to your peers, do you think you're like an aberration, or do you think there are actually a lot of
No, I think
opportunities?
I think there's a lot of people in the same boat. I think it takes a certain type of person, both in temperament and skill set, to want to be a manager. I'm sure some people have done it because they felt like they had to, and maybe the Peter principle applied there, where they maybe weren't ready for that, they didn't have the right skill set and weren't so successful in that role. So I think trying to prevent that from happening to me.
Okay, so the Peter principle is people will rise to their highest level of incompetence,
Right.
I believe is how it's worded.
Yep,
So,
exactly.
can you describe how that phenomenon works?
Well, I think you figure I keep have to having to climb the ladder, and each rung on the ladder has higher levels of skills. But once you move from the technical ladder, sometimes you hit a ceiling, and if you want to keep climbing, you have to hop over to the management ladder, which is a totally different set of skills. Some people have both. Some people don't. I I don't. So if I got to be a manager, I think I would be feeling it over my head. I don't know what I'm doing. Definitely wouldn't go well. I
Yeah.
think.
So, do you do you think you could, like, if somebody like put the proverbial gun to your head and said you gotta like read this, you go read all these airport management books and like the
Yeah, I
golden
mean,
hour
I think,
manager or
yeah,
whatever?
I think if I had to, um, maybe I would, and maybe I will go that way as if I've, with the job market, what it is right now, especially for programmers, maybe it, maybe it'll become more realistic at some point. But I do read some types of like management type books too, to try to part to just understand how to manage up a little bit, try to understand how my management is thinking, but also, maybe to prepare some dormant skills, in case I do go that way at some point. Who
That's a cool
knows?
takeaway. So, managing up, like essentially managing your managers and
Yeah,
empathizing with them and understanding like why they're asking you to do the things they're doing and what pressure they're under, so you could
right.
be, I guess, kind of a more empathetic charge. Which,
Yes.
shout out to you for, like, a lot of people are just like, screw my manager, I don't like the guy. Like the whole Office Space. If anybody's seen Office
Yeah,
Space,
yeah. Oh yeah.
like basically the whole theme of that movie is it sucks to work for somebody else, and your managers are always a bunch of fools, like the Dilbert comics and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's where the Peter principle comes from, right? Is just
Right.
that people eventually
Pointy haired boss.
yeah, the pointy haired boss who doesn't
Yeah.
understand the actual technical details. Like, do your managers, like, have you had a lot of managers who used to be devs themselves?
Yes. And those tend to be the better ones, I think.
Yeah. And this is one of the reasons, by the way, little aside, that I always encourage people to learn programming and hard technical skills, because even if you intend to, go into like a managerial role, I genuinely believe pretty much everybody in tech needs to understand these things, because
Yeah.
if you don't understand like the field you're working in, it's going to limit people's respect for you and your ability to empathize with your charges and all that. So that's just like, I'll get off my soapbox, but I think that is really chill that like a lot of your managers have been devs themselves, um, and not just pointy haired bosses.
Yeah, yeah. I've been very lucky. I haven't had a bad manager yet, so hopefully that'll keep going.
Right on. Well, I want to talk about some of the changes in the field that you mentioned. You said like how things shape up. You might have to move into management. I'm not sure if that was just like a nervous aside or if that's something you've seriously considered. But we're going to delve into that real quick. I just want to thank the 11,423 kind folks who support Free Code Camp through a monthly donation. You can join these chill human beings, and you can support our charity's mission by going to donate.freecodecamp.org. I also want to say that support for this podcast comes from a grant from Wix Studio. Wix Studio provides developers tools to rapidly build websites with everything out of the box, then extend, replace, and break boundaries with code. Learn more at wixstudio.com. So, Joe, is that just like nervous energy, or like do you think things are fundamentally changing? That the labor market for devs is fundamentally changing?
I think for me, it's mostly nerves. Partly because the job market is changing, and I can't help but think as I, approach my mid 40s now, um, maybe it will become my only viable option at some point. I don't know. I mean, I hope not, because I love working on technical stuff. Um, that's my thing.
Yeah. Well, I want to delve into like how you came to love technical skills, and so this is the autobiographical portion of the podcast. But let
Okay.
me quickly recap the last 43 years of your life, if you're cool with me telling you. I'm
Yeah.
44, you're 43, you're like right behind me.
Yep.
1980, 1980,
1981.
81, right on.
Yep.
So maybe you can tell us a little bit about like your childhood and how you fell in love with computers.
Yeah, sure. So I had an uncle who was big into computers, and I would always, go over to his house, have sleepovers and all that, and he would, show me stuff on his computer. I'd play with his computer, and he finally bought me. It was a an IBM 286 clone or something was my first computer I got, and I was the only 12-year-old I know of that was playing around with MS-DOS and this kind of stuff. But I don't know. I can't place what it is that lit a fire in me about it, but I've just loved it ever since. And got into programming in high school, writing QBasic code. I'm really dating myself there, but and then it's going to school for computer science just seemed like the natural next step for me. And I wasn't sure. It was for a while. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do programming. I was had more of an interest in IT type stuff. But once I got to my first year computer science class, I was like, "Oh, this is so cool! Writing code and building stuff it hooked me, So
Yeah, tell me a little bit more
yeah.
about your uncle. Like, what was his role in your like? Were you hanging out with him regularly? Was he in the
Oh yeah,
Boston
yeah,
area?
yeah. He was local. Didn't have any kids of their own, so my brother and sister and I were always hanging out with them. To give my parents a break. But yeah, I think he worked in IT, an IT related role at the time, but he had all kinds of technical stuff at his house.
So he was like a pretty big force. Like, just having would you say he's like kind of a role model of yours when you were growing
I
up?
would say, yeah, definitely. That's what shaped me into my interest in computers and technology that I have today.
Yeah. Well, may everybody have a cool uncle like you did.
That's right.
Yeah, or maybe you can be that cool uncle if you're listening
Maybe.
to this for some of your nieces and nephews.
We'll
Um,
see.
yeah.
I've got one of each.
Yeah. Awesome. And you've got a son as well, 6
Yep,
years
he's
old.
6. Yep.
Yeah. Very cool. So let's talk about like AI. That
Yes.
is the big thing that everybody is concerned about. The topic du jour, and it is changing software development a little bit, but it may be changing software development a lot going forward. A lot of that is still to be determined, and a lot of that is kind of in the eye of the beholder. Um, what is your perspective on AI and how it's impacting software development?
Well, I think it's absolutely changing things a lot. I think that the just like coding skills on their own, I think will probably become less valuable as AIs become more better at writing, the code on their own. I think, the fundamentals, architecture type skills, data structure, algorithm type things, hate to say the kind of things you learn in the more formal CS type education, I think are going to be more important as the kind of menial coding becomes replaced by AIs and AI agents and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So let's talk. Let's go. One of your recent tweets, and I'm going to quote it directly because I think it's important. Is you said CS degrees are going to be seen as more valuable again. Was there a
Yes.
period when they were kind of denatured or debased a little bit, and employers were like less interested in CS fundamentals?
I think so. I think, for a while, the self-taught um, movement, if you want to call it that, I think became really big. We saw boot camps come up real big, a lot of, awesome resources like Free Code Camp where anybody could just go and learn, teach themselves. So I think the CS degree maybe wasn't less valuable, but it wasn't a must-have anymore. And I think I think a lot of companies felt that way because I mean I've worked with very talented people who don't have CS degrees, so it's not the only path to success. But I do think that, like I said, as AI is writing more of our daily code for us, I think knowing some of those larger skills is going to make you more attractive, I think.
Yeah. Let's say
And
hypothetically you had, a niece or a nephew. You mentioned you had one of each.
yes.
That wanted to go to school and wanted to get like a stable job at the end of it, and
Hmm.
was kind of like looking at getting like a business degree, or like liberal arts degree, or a computer science degree, or like electrical engineering. Like how would you advise them based on your experience and your current feel of where things are going? Like,
That's a very good question. I'd have to think about it, but I don't know now if I would recommend going on this on a software development path for at least for a CS degree education, because I mean I don't know, it might replace all of us someday, so I don't know how viable of a career path it will remain, I'm hoping it'll stay that way, for my own reasons too, because I always joke and say I'm not good at anything else. It's programming or that's it. So
yeah.
that's my hope. But I mean,
Well,
even my son, I was always like, oh, I'm going to get him into coding at an early age, and now I'm not so sure. Although they are doing some coding related things in his kindergarten class, which blows my mind that they're starting so early.
yeah. Well, like, what are some aspects of software development, or like really the modern economy at large, to the
Yeah.
extent that you understand it, that are like less likely to be automated based on your perspective on AI tools?
I think the trades for it's gonna be a long time before you have an AI electrician. I would hope. I think things that have a more human touch. I think things like, I'd be really worried if I was a graphic designer. I'm a little worried as a writer. I think those kinds of um, paths are going to be more at risk. But I think, a car mechanic, an electrician, that kind of stuff. And I think, more business type roles, I think will still be valuable, at least for a while. Who knows what's going to happen, right? I just Claude 4.0 just came out and it's supposedly huge and revolutionary. And so, like, who knows? It changes day to day, Can only plan from what we know.
How much of this do you think might be just like the marketing hype around companies wanting very much to get these developers off their balance sheets because developers are very expensive?
I, I think
And
that's a part of it.
how much of it do you think is actual, like, how much is steak and how much is sizzle?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some of that, and I think that if companies start replacing software engineers wholesale with AIs, there's going to be a lot of mess to clean up, and then they're going to hire us all back, and we're going to make great consulting rates, cleaning up all the vibe coding cleanup. But I think there's definitely still some of it there.
Yeah. And so that sounds like a pretty balanced take. Um, when you like, do you have, you've been in the industry for 21 years. So like there was
Right.
this big push to like offshore things and like, let's move everything over to India, for example. And I've
Right.
talked with, like, I have a very high opinion of Indian engineers, but
Mm.
fundamentally there are a lot of cross-cultural communication issues. There's a lot of coordination. We're working with people in a completely different culture, like halfway around the world. Like, how much would you compare the fervor? This is maybe a loaded question. The fervor around replacing devs with dev and data AI, or like NVIDIA just offering a developer as a service for $1,000 instead of like the $5,000, $10,000 you'd be paying to an engineer. Like, how much of that is just wishful thinking on their part, and how much of it do you think is actual, like, this could actually happen with current capabilities? Let's not assume that AI is going to geometrically continue to increase. Everybody wants to believe that, but like, we may be approaching limits. We don't know.
Right.
We don't know whether there are step changes around the corner, or whether like this is about as good. Like, we may have kind of reached the like 80% of goodness, and then it's just like incremental gains from here on out.
Right.
For until like the next big breakthrough. And LMs were a big breakthrough. It was a big discovery that if you just put enough data in there, you can get really good generative AI output and stuff like that.
Right.
I consider that to be kind of like a discovery, rather than like some particular invention, because Chinese hedge funds are reproducing comparable quality for like a pretty tiny budget. So it may not be this big proprietary technology, but LMs may just be like one of those things where everybody has like a spreadsheet, and it's not that profound of a thing to write your own spreadsheet.
Right.
It's one of the free code camp exercises in functional programming, to create your own spreadsheet, right? Or
Great.
create your own Twitter, right? Twitter's
Yeah.
not some big thing. It's just like the discovery that you could get like a social network and then to be useful. So I consider AI or like LLM specifically to be a discovery more than an invention. But there are vested interests, like these companies that have multi-billion-dollar market capitalizations and stuff like that. And so I guess what I'm trying to say, very long wind up for the question. Given current, abilities of these systems, that you understand them, assuming that there's not just some crazy growth in capability that's right around the corner. But like if everything was frozen in time, how much do you think it would gradually come to impact the industry? Because nothing happens instantaneously. It takes a while for things to get dispersed and for, the small business down the road to like adopt, different tools and stuff like that. How much of an impact do you think the current tools would have on software development?
I think it'll definitely have an impact. It's not gonna. I'm not one of these believers that's going to put us all out of a job in 12 months. I don't think that's going to happen. The human aspect is still very important, I think. But of course, it is going to, companies will probably not need to employ as many engineers, because of the productivity gains that the ones that are left get from AI tools. So, the way things, like you said, the way things are today, I think there'll definitely be an impact, but it's not over yet. I don't think.
Okay. So when you said that, like, you wouldn't necessarily advise your nephews and nieces to go study computer related fields like computer
Yeah.
science or software engineering, how do you feel about your own career? Because you're pretty young. I'm 43. You think you're going to be working 20 years from now, 25 years from now?
I really hope so. Because again, like I said, I don't know what else I would do. Um, it's something I think about a lot. Gives me some anxiety to think about, so I try not to dwell on it too much. I try to just try to stay as relevant as I can for as long as I can, and hope I have enough saved for retirement when the machines take over.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about computer science and the things that you've learned and the things that you think were really helpful about your undergraduate degree. And we can talk about your college experience. You went to a public university. It's not like a super selective fancy pants university. It's just like
Right.
where a lot of people who want to get like an engineering degree and not go super duper into debt go, right?
Right. Sure.
University of Massachusetts at
Lowell.
Lowell. Okay.
Yep.
And you were able to get through your degree. My understanding is you got some scholarships and you just took out student loans and you walked out with like around 20K in debt.
Yeah. It was pretty manageable, and I paid it off, just the monthly payments for a while, and then eventually I just decided, you know what, let's just get rid of this debt. And I just, I was fortunate enough to be able to pay off the student loan debt and have that be gone. That's, some people are saddled with a lot of debt. It's not really an option, which is it's tough. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, what did you learn during that 4 years that you were at UMass Lowell that you use the most in your day-to-day work as a software engineer?
So the most memorable courses and things that I did, it was a 2 semester sequence all on UI stuff. Back then it was Java applets and things. I'm dating myself again, but it really lit a fire in me, got me really excited about front end development, user interfaces, human factors, and that stuck with me to this day. That was other than, of course, the fundamentals, algorithms and graph traversal things, which I have used here and there over the years. It's not all, you always say, oh, when am I ever going to use this? But you use a good amount of it. And I think even if you don't use some of it directly, you still have the background and might spark some ideas. You might think of an algorithm that's sort of like an algorithm you learned about back in the day. Those kinds of things I think make it valuable.
Yeah.
That's
So
what stuck with me.
just having like kind of like this associative network in your head of like
Sure.
how computers work fundamentally allows you to draw like analogies and make kind of inductive leaps and try
Yeah.
things that you wouldn't necessarily think to try if you had just gone to a pure technical program where they're going like the 12-month boot camp or 12-week boot camps that like all the Wall Street guys would go to. Like but this is true. This is actually who was going to boot camps. Who was going to boot camps and getting jobs? It was people from Wall Street who were like, hey, I can make even more as a software engineer and it's less risky than working at this bank. And so I'm gonna pay a bunch of money. I'm gonna pay 20K. I'm gonna go through Hack Reactor, which is one of the many now defunct programs, and I'm
Hmm.
gonna just go get a job at like Uber or something afterward.
Yeah.
And there were people that were able to do that, but most of them already had like college degrees and tons of work experience and stuff like that. But they were just learning kind of like I would say like the tip top of the iceberg in terms of the skills that you actually need to work as a dev, and they were just kind of like filling in the blanks, I guess, on the job, or maybe they just weren't doing a very good job. I don't know because they didn't have the CS degree, they didn't have the
Right.
fundamentals in place. But
Right.
that was something you could do during the boom times in 2010, 2012. Um, and I'd argue you probably can't do that now. You probably do need to build those fundamentals.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. So if somebody didn't have the resources to go to a computer science degree program, or they just didn't have time, they're a busy parent, they're 40 years old, and they still want to work as a software engineer, like how would you recommend they go about doing this? Because you have written several books about different things like web APIs, CSS, things like that, and you clearly know a lot about like developer education. Like, how would you advise someone to go about getting that kind of foundational knowledge?
I think the most important first step is to know your learning style. Books are great. I love books, but some people don't learn so well, don't retain so well from books. Other people learn well from interactive tutorials or videos, or some people learn well from all of it. So I think identifying your learning style is the most important to make sure that the things you learn are stick without you having to really force it too hard, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Have you identified your own learning style?
I find I do best with videos and also reading.
Yeah. So, like, let's say hypothetically, your boss comes to you. They're like, Joe, we need you to learn Kubernetes. I know something
Please
like
no.
that you don't know anything about, right? Like,
Yeah.
like your job depends on you knowing Kubernetes in 8 weeks from now.
Yeah.
Walk us through how you would go about like doing that based on all the other things you've learned over the years.
I would probably start honestly by going to like Udemy and looking for like a Kubernetes course. I've had a lot of good results with courses on there. There are some that are not so good, but there are some really really good ones. And then I would probably find a good book on it as well and kind of use one to support the other.
Yeah,
I watch a segment of the course and then find part in the book that talks about the same stuff and try to correlate it together. And the most important thing, actually, I didn't even mention, but try to build something because you can learn all you want, but if you don't use it for anything, you're gonna forget it. I mean, I've totally honestly, I've learned Python, Ruby, PHP, Elixir. I've forgotten all of it because I never use it. I'm redoing a Python tutorial right now because I forgot all of it. So I think when you build stuff with what you're learning, it really solidifies it in another part of your brain, and it sticks around for longer for sure.
absolutely. Yeah, I will second that. And the FreeCodeCamp core curriculum is extremely project focused because we want you to be like kind of learning while you're building. Because I strongly believe project oriented learning is like kind of probably the most universal of learning styles. I understand that some people prefer just reading a book, but like I think just building something,
Yeah,
the proof is kind of uh, in the fact that so many people I talk to emphasize the role of actually building.
right.
So you have built a lot of open source projects over the
Yes,
years, which is super chill. Thanks for your contributions to open source.
I love
Uh,
it.
and maybe you could talk about like an open source project that has been like successful for you in your mind.
Sure. Yeah. So the one that comes to mind first is I built this emoji picker component. I wanted to challenge myself to just build something in plain JavaScript without using frameworks or anything like that. And I don't really remember at the time an emoji picker seemed like a cool idea, so I went with that. And I spent a lot of time working on it, and it was really hard, by the way. Building something non-trivial in JavaScript without some kind of framework or library is really hard. And I honestly kind of ended up creating my own mini framework within that to make it doable. But it was, I don't know if I would say it was super successful, but the biggest claim to fame I have for it is Starbucks one year they did a promotion, some kind of fall promotion around pumpkins and pumpkin spice lattes, and they had some I don't remember. It's been a while, but it was some kind of emoji scavenger hunt type thing, and someone has asked. They posted a question on GitHub about it, and they mentioned that they were working on it, and they used my emoji picker in the Starbucks thing. So that was pretty cool. Um, that's about as far as that got, and it kind of the usage kind of went down, and other things happened in life, and I decided, no, I think it's time to put this thing to rest. So, but it was a cool project while it lasted.
Yeah. When do you know that you need to take your proverbial open source project out behind the shed?
Well, I think it depends on what you hope to accomplish with it. You know, if you want it to become a big popular project and it's just not getting traction, maybe that's when it's time. Or if other things happen in life you get busy with, like you have a kid that's now a few years old and a lot more fun to spend time with. Maybe then it's time to scale that back. It depends on what you hope to accomplish with it and what's going on with your life.
Yeah. One of the things I really admire about you is that you seem to have like this really good balance. Like you work, and a lot of people are just content working and not doing really anything outside of work. And yet you do. You have projects, but you still take time for your family, and you take a lot of time for yourself. We'll get into that in a little bit. But you could just kind of be content with your job. And I know lots of devs who they don't even have a social media presence. They don't even have a LinkedIn, right? They're literally just working at their job, and they're logging off, and they're going and just playing video games or going out and hiking or something like that. Right? And yet you're building open source and you're writing a bunch of books. And my understanding is you're working on your fourth book right now. These are like the big O'Reilly books that you go to Barnes and Noble and you see them on a shelf and stuff like that. Or you order them through online, but they're physical dead trees,
Yes.
printed, that you can set your computer monitor on if it's too low. Or that you can put under your kid if he can't quite reach the table, right? But, after you read them, you can keep on a shelf and look really smart because you got a technical book on your shelf. Or you can use them as a reference, right? As you continue to go, and you can flip through the pages and look at the index, and there's something about having a physical paper book. But what I wanted to ask about is what drives you to do stuff outside of just being that person that just logs off and goes and enjoys life.
Well, full transparency, one reason is definitely I want to have it help me be more employable. Hopefully, that's one for sure. Get more exposure out there. But it's not just that. I just really love doing it. I think it's a lot of fun doing this kind of stuff. The analogy I like to use, I mentioned this to you before, someone who might work as a carpenter or construction or whatever, they have their woodworking projects they do on the weekend as well because they just love to do it. It's kind of like that to me.
Yeah. One thing that strikes me is you don't seem to have a big ego, oh, I'm this big, powerful, super smart software engineer.
No.
You talk about carpenters like they're your peers, right? You talk about plumbers and electricians like they're on the same level as you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Is that how you feel?
Yeah, I don't have an ego. I think if anything, it's the opposite. I've imposter syndrome is still with me after 21 years. I deal with it all the time, always comparing myself to others, especially big names out there on Twitter. They're building all these crazy big cool things, and it's inevitable that you compare it to yourself. Um, but yeah, and I think every job is important in this world. The world keeps turning because all these different jobs are all getting done. You know, I got to call a plumber about something in my basement soon. I can't do that.
Yeah.
And the plumber, he cares about his craft. Well, I hope the one I call cares about his craft. He's constantly learning new stuff, and it's there's a lot of parallels, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really cool perspective. And I just want to call that out because I do sometimes talk to people who are like, well, I've got this fancy degree and this many Twitter followers and all this stuff.
Yeah,
and,
no, that's not me.
and yet it is really chill. It's just meet people who this is just my job. I'm getting everybody is part of society and trying to get what they're done, needs to get done. And then as a result, trash gets collected. The trash guy comes and gets it. The post office workers deliver my mail. And I can reliably post something to a friend, or we can send out a FreeCodeCamp shirt to people. By the way, we have FreeCodeCamp shirts just like this one. No shipping. It's you can get one. And thanks to the USPS for sending those anywhere in the US. And yeah. But they make that possible. So
Right.
like when I see like postal workers at McDonald's when I'm like getting a morning coffee for my wife or something like that. Like usually we just burn the coffee, but like let's say we're on a road trip to go see the
Yeah.
fam, right? And like when I see post office workers, I'm like, hey, thanks for helping out. Like
Oh
I
yeah,
genuinely feel it. Like, I get the vibe that you feel it too, and
I do.
that you think that everybody's job is important. Now, I would argue there are jobs that are maybe bad for society, where people are working in the opposite direction of the interests of humanity and things like that, where they're involved in
That's
some
true.
zero sum type game, like maybe a lot of like the finance related stuff.
Mm.
I hope I'm not offending anybody listening to this, but like there are jobs that are like where okay, is this actually a good job? Like, am
Yeah,
I
yeah. It's
actually
definitely not
doing it that
universal.
positive, right?
Yeah.
Um, but what you're doing, like, let's talk about your job. And again, you work at a big security firm, and I don't want to dive too deep into what you do because I know some of it is, I don't want them to have to redact parts of the interview. But my understanding is you all create software that helps people identify, supply chain type attacks and things like that,
Right.
CVE, common vulnerability and exposure type
Hmm.
stuff, and you write software that essentially scans people's tech stacks for like dependencies and libraries that they're pulling in, and make sure there aren't any outstanding known issues
Right.
security wise. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe you could talk about why the work you're doing is important and what would happen if people just stopped caring about security.
Oh, all kinds of bad things would happen. I think security is super important, especially the supply chain type things. I mean, you hear stories all the time about, these NPM packages that do evil things that, they get installed and infect your whole app and steals your API keys and all kinds of nasty stuff. And I think without tools like that, you're taking a big chance.
What have been the most prominent like instances of these kinds of things happening over the past 21 years that you've seen where like, oh damn, they should have used our software?
Yeah, I mean, I know there's I forget what it was called, but there was that big OpenSSL vulnerability.
Was that Heartbleed?
Heartbleed, that's it. Yeah, yeah. That was a big one, I remember. That's one stands out to me. But I think it it changes so often. And actually one kind of maybe unique vulnerability vector now is someone was telling me, I was talking to one of my coworkers about this once, that sometimes you're working with an LLM and it might hallucinate an npm package that doesn't exist and advise you to go and install it. Well, maybe me as an evil person, I might go, hey, I'm going to go create that npm package and make it do some bad stuff, steal some API keys or something and publish it, so then the next time an LLM hallucinates that for somebody else, hey, now I got their API keys
I
because they
mean, you can
installed
just
my
see people
package.
like registering
Don't get
tons
any
of
ideas,
npm
please.
packages just on the hopes that maybe npm hallucinates that, or that an
Right.
LLM hallucinates that.
Or even typo squatting too.
Yeah, typo squatting is a huge issue. Like
Yeah.
freeCodeCamp owns like, I don't know, 60 plus domains because people keep forgetting our
Jeez.
name, or like
Yeah.
putting an S at the end of our name or something like that. And
Right.
Google actually owns like numbers that convert into Google, like on a phone. They
Really, that's
register like
awesome.
those domains, anything that could potentially be like typo squatted, or
Yeah.
like an SSL cert, like where you get the phishing link and you're like, is this actually, like, you check the SSL cert before you enter your password, and it's like,
Hmm.
Google is a Mountain View cert, and you're like, all right, is this legit? Like, and then you
Yeah.
just you try to like open it in a different window or try to navigate to it some manual way so you're not using the direct link in the email. I got one the other day with like some sort of trademark dispute thing on like x.com, Twitter, right? And I'm almost certain that it was just a phishing attempt. I'm
Oh
not
man,
completely
those are
certain, but like, yeah, it's scary. Like,
yeah,
and I can imagine even scarier when you don't have time to go and look at the code
right.
of the different package, and you got this person just vibe coding, like just wholesale, including a whole bunch of vulnerabilities in their software. So
Right.
with a tool like yours, it could identify like a typo squatted package.
I think if there's a vulnerability record out there that talks about it, then yeah, I think so.
So let's talk about how these CVE documents get to put together in these lists of known vulnerabilities and stuff like that. How much do you know about like,
A little bit. I'm
yeah,
not an expert on it for sure.
yeah.
But I will say actually I think it was my emoji picker library actually has one CVE that was filed against it some years ago. So
Okay. So you've
there's
been
my
on the
badge
other
of
side of
honor.
this.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
did you
I
did you
don't
like tell people like, oh, there's nothing wrong with this, or like was
no,
it
I
an
don't
actual
remember.
thing that you had to patch?
No, it was a valid thing. Yeah, and I don't remember. I didn't find it. Somebody else reported it through GitHub. And they created GitHub security advisory, and then that also created a CVE. But I think it was might have been a cross-site scripting vulnerability. I don't remember exactly because it's a few years ago. But think some, really smart researchers out there that hopefully responsibly disclose these things that they find. That's probably one of the biggest sources of these things being found and published.
Yeah.
Hopefully, like I said, in a responsible way, so that companies have a chance to patch them before we tell the whole world about it.
Yeah. And I'll take this opportunity to publicly thank all the people who have responsibly disclosed vulnerabilities in the Free Code Camp open source platform over
Oh,
the
nice.
years. Yeah, it's super chill. Like these people are out there, and a lot of them are like looking for bug bounties, which we don't have bug bounties. But
Mhm.
if you, so please don't write us about asking for like thousands of dollars because you discovered this very common vulnerability that is not actually a vulnerability. We get so many spam emails, people trying to do that, just
Oh,
hoping
sure.
that like maybe no, that's a known, that's like an intentional functionality or something like that, and you have to correct them, and they take up a lot of your time. But for every person who's doing that, there's somebody who's responsibly disclosing something we genuinely missed. And that's one of the great things about open source with enough eyeballs, all bugs are
Right.
shallow, because you got these security researchers out there looking out for you.
And these people are super smart. Like I read some of these CVEs and like the way the exploit is done, and I'm like, how does anybody even think to try that? It's wild. It blows my mind.
Yeah, very cool. So I want to talk a little bit about like the actual book publishing process, because I think that's
Sure.
really interesting. That I have had some published authors on the Free Code Camp podcast before, like Dr. Chuck, who teaches at U Michigan. He's published some books and stuff like that, and but you have written 3 books and you're working on your 4th one. So there's like I think it's like web APIs. There's a CSS book, and
The third one is a bit of it's an older book, and it's all about Gatsby and Netlify CMS, which are both kind of all but dead now. So it was
yeah.
a very, very narrow niche book that never did very well.
Well, I've heard that like contemporary books often have kind of like a shelf life. Like you think of like a magazine
Yeah.
having a shelf life of like a month, and then the new issue comes out, or a newspaper has like a shelf life of a day. How long would you
Sure.
say the shelf life of the typical programming book is? Like the typical, we think of, I just call them O'Reilly books. I know there are lots of other great publishers
Yeah.
like Manning, Opress, all these other publishers too, but I'll just call them O'Reilly because that's the brand everybody's most familiar with.
Right. I think it depends on the topic, but I mean, speaking from experience, the book I'm working on now is a second edition of my CSS book, and that was published about almost 5 years ago. So I mean, it depends how quickly things change. If it's something like CSS where there's new stuff getting added all the time, but the stuff that's there is not going to change. So maybe that is relevant for a little bit longer, which is why it took 5 years for them to be interested in do a second edition.
So how does the
But
workflow work? Like, let's say hypothetically, somebody's working as dev. They've got like 5 or 10 years experience working at, a bank or a hospital, or maybe at a big tech firm or something like that. Maybe, software as a service, or some sort of like, tool, like the tool that you're working on, or one of the many tools you're probably working on at your job. Like they get approached. Do they get approached? Does somebody from the book publisher reach out to you, or did you reach out to them?
I reached out to them. I mean, it can happen both ways. I've seen stories of people, maybe blogged a lot about a certain topic, and then a publisher reached out to them and said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing a book?" In my case, actually, my book started out self-published on Leanpub, and they did not sell pretty much at all. And I just kind of on a whim said, "You know what? Why not? I'll pitch it to a publisher. What's the worst that could happen?" And they
Because you'd
basically
already
have
written the
these.
book at this point. It was just
Yeah,
a
yeah.
distribution
Right,
consideration.
right. Yeah. I mean, they have these acquisition editors, so their full-time job is to find new authors and get new books underway. And they basically just have a long proposal form you fill out. You do like the outline of the book, what other books would compete with this, what's the unique selling points, all this kind of stuff. And if you make a good enough case for it, they'll do a book with you.
Yeah, and how does that work, like from a monetary perspective? Because it's a lot of work to write a book.
Yes.
Like,
So
yeah, just
yeah.
walk us through in as much detail as possible. If anybody's ever considered writing a technical book, Joe's about to drop. Give us the skinny.
Don't do it to get rich. You don't do it for
Okay.
the money. That's for sure. And unless you're one of these rare cases where you have this insanely
The
successful
cracking
book.
the coding interview, like
Right, right.
Gail
Or
McDowell, I think is her name.
yep, which
She's
sits
made,
over on my
I don't know.
bookshelf.
Yeah, I mean she's probably made millions of dollars off that book over the
Oh
years.
yeah. But the way it typically works is they'll give you an advance, which is an upfront payment which counts against future royalties. So, one of my books, I got an advance for $1,000, and then the book starts selling. I don't get any more royalty money until that $1,000 is exhausted from people buying the books. And it happened eventually. I probably make about 20 or 30 bucks a month on book royalties, which, buys me a coffee, maybe every couple months buys me a new video game, but that's about it. But
Yeah.
it's all right. I used to have a hang up about, oh, it's not selling well, it's a flop, but that's not what it's about to me anymore
What
anyways.
is it
I've
about?
The process of writing, I just love writing. It's really fun for me. Also, you learn a lot of stuff. Like some parts of these books, I didn't know a ton about the, the material in certain sections, so I had to learn a lot about it first to then write about it. Which is actually what's one of the biggest benefits I think is I'm a lot better with CSS now after having written that book than before.
Yeah. And what are some things that have changed since the first edition of your book that you published about 5 years ago and CSS today? Because you have
Sure.
spent a lot of time learning and keeping up on CSS and the many changes and improvements to CSS over the past 5 years. Like, what are some of the biggest changes that are going to be in the second edition of your book?
So some things like, so for example, the first edition covers things like CSS grid already, but then there's now CSS subgrid, which is this whole other thing when you have nested grids and how the layouts all work together. Another thing is actually there's quite a few things like this that you used to need a preprocessor framework like Less or Sass for that now CSS just does for you. Like variables, nested rules. There's even a function now in CSS where you can mix colors, blend different colors together at certain ratios and things like that, which is one of the things I'm adding to the second edition. But it just changes so fast. There's an anchoring position, anchor positioning, so you can, if you have like a pop-up element, you can float it relative to another element. You can have it anchored so that when you scroll the page, it moves with it, and that kind of stuff. There's just so much happening. It's hard to keep up with for sure. But writing a book about it helps you to learn some of it for sure.
Yeah. And what are some of the things that people should consider if they're considering to write a book, like in terms of the time investment? Uh,
It is, yeah, it is a big time investment. Each book, the one I did with O'Reilly, Web API Cookbook, that took me about a year from start to finish of writing. The CSS one, the one I'm writing now, I started it in December, and I'm going to be wrapping up the first draft in a couple of weeks, probably. So not quite as long, but you're definitely looking to a 6 months to a year of writing. But then it doesn't end there because that's just the draft. Then typically you have technical reviewers who provide their feedback. You make sure what you're writing is actually true, and then you need to go through and make changes there. Then you have copy editors that want to change how you word certain things. So it's a long, drawn out process. I mean, it's could be a year and a half or more before your book actually hits the shelves.
okay, awesome. And you have published a handbook on the Free Code Camp publication. And
Yes.
we do have an editorial team that looks over it and does some basic fact check. We don't have like the full technical review process and like panel of experts that like O'Reilly would offer. Can you compare and contrast the process of writing that handbook that you published, which I'm linking to in the show notes? I'm linking to lots of exciting stuff in the show notes, including Joe, your collection of like recently finished video games,
Yes.
because
My
you're a
number one
hardcore gamer.
hobby
We'll talk
outside
about
of
that in a
coding.
minute. But
Yes.
but for books,
Yeah.
like maybe you can compare and contrast like that experience getting published at like a what was it O'Reilly? Which publisher was this book through?
One was O'Reilly. The Web API Cookbook was O'Reilly, and then the other two were with Apress.
Okay, Apris. So
Yeah.
maybe you can compare and contrast those two processes and the time involved.
Yeah, so of course, writing, for the one I did for Free Code Camp was a lot less time. Um, it was quicker, and it was because, well, first of all, it's a shorter form content. It's not, a 300-page book, um, which which is why some of this takes a lot of time. But these kind of shorter form things, and they tend to go through in a more streamlined fashion, and it depends too on the editorial process too.
So, in terms of writing technical books and going through this process, what is the technical review process like when you're publishing with a big, like, do you actually know the people, or is it sent through emails back and forth, or is there some big Google Doc everybody's on, or some more proprietary power tool for that?
Yeah, it differs depending on the publisher. When I did O'Reilly, most of the feedback came in through Google Docs or sent through email. That was more rigorous. I had four technical reviewers on that book, and it was a pretty rigorous process. And the with A-Press, it was a little scaled back. I have one technical reviewer, and they just leave comments in the Word document. That's the first draft.
That's cool. So, the revision process, you said it takes like a year and a half or so to just get the first, like the book written in draft
Right,
form. And then the
right.
revision process, what chunk of time is that?
That could take, it could take a few more months at least for sure, depending on how many changes, how many rounds of changes there needs to be. The most time consuming thing for me actually is after a round of changes is done through and they update the proof of the book, and then I basically have to read the whole book multiple times and make
Yeah.
sure that everything looks good and we don't find something else.
Okay. So the book is basically done. You've
Yep,
gotten your advance. The
yep.
book is ready to like start shipping out to bookstores or listed on online storefronts and stuff like that. Can you walk us through what happens after, the final gold record, so to speak, has been fabricated and now you're printing?
I mean, that's the end of the main process. The big role that you have after that is trying to market it. The publishers can only do so much, which is why I will say this might be a controversial statement. I don't know, but people that have much larger online followings, I think, will have an easier time having a hit book because you've got more people seeing your promotional tweets and posts about it. Um, you know,
Yeah, I mean,
that's
it's
that's
no
that's part
huge
of it.
surprise. Like a lot of the best children's authors are just celebrities who had
Yeah,
somebody
I
ghostwrite a
know.
children's book.
Exactly.
I mean, maybe Matthew McConaughey really wrote that kid's book that
Yeah,
I see
right.
it, that every library in America had like felt obligated to buy a copy of. But
Yeah,
I
right.
think they just slapped his name on it, right?
Yeah.
Probably. We'll see.
Probably.
No,
Yeah.
no shade to fellow Texan Matthew McConaughey. Um, but like, so the book, you're out there essentially cheerleading for your book and like trying like, hey, check out this book. This book, like, did you do like any sort of like signings or go to any conferences or like throwing your book up in the
No,
air?
no, I did a couple of giveaways of signed copies on Twitter, which was pretty cool. There was a pretty good response to those. But no, I've never been into any conferences in a capacity for promoting a book or that, I would love to do something like that. But the opportunity just hasn't come around.
Yeah. And do you think you'll write more books? Like, is this like a big long term thing? Like, I know you're updating this CSS thing. Do you think, because it does sound extremely time intensive and it hasn't generated a lot of money, is it just like a passion thing for you? Like, are you going to keep
It
doing
is.
this?
I don't know, because every time I finish one and then the sales aren't what I hope, I always say, okay, I think I'm done doing books. And then something else comes along and said, maybe I'll do another one. So anything could happen. I think I don't have any other plans for anything else after this one for now. But who knows? I might get some great idea, go write a book on MCP or something. I don't know, model context protocol.
Yeah. They're basically an API for talking with LLMs, is my
Right.
understanding. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as technology continues to, okay, and then technical writing, I can't help but ask the question about AI because everybody's asking, like, is technical writing dead? Are we just going to have AIs writing our documentation and by extension writing our technical books? Are people just going to have conversational learning through talking with an LLM, or are there going to be AI overviews in Google that like summarize the entire book? Like, what do you think is going to happen to the future of technical books? And do you think that, like, you said that's a big part of your learning style, but do you think
Yeah.
people are going to replace that aspect of their learning style, and the youngins, the TikTok raised kids, are just going to jump straight to the Cliff Notes, like the AI summaries?
I think that's a real possibility. I think it's going to become harder for authors to create to write their own content that really stands out because AI is getting pretty good at writing this stuff on their own.
Well, it does have an
It's not,
unfair advantage in having read everything you've ever written and
yeah,
everything I've ever written.
that anyone's ever written. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's like trying to compete with the ghost of yourself, basically.
Yeah,
And what?
exactly. Right.
Yeah,
It's like, yeah. But yeah, I think it's going to become more challenging, and I think the human touch is still an advantage. I mean, they have things that can detect AI writing because it is still kind of detectable, predictable. Um, but I think that things are going to improve, and it's going to become more of a challenge, probably.
yeah. So, do you think if somebody has like a decent Twitter following, like let's say they've got, I don't know, like 20K people on Twitter, or 20K, LinkedIn's actually much more important now for
Yeah.
building a following than Twitter is, in my humble opinion. Uh, but like, let's say they're on LinkedIn and they've got like maybe like 20K followers from just giving conference talks and like being around and like talking to people, being in the industry for a while. Do you think that they would benefit from doing a technical book? And do you think they'd have the means through which to publicize it?
Yeah, I think they would definitely have the means to publicize it for sure. I mean, even probably a lot of people with big followings like that, you could probably just self-publish and you probably sell a ton of them that way. You don't need the publisher in that case, and your royalty rates will be much higher if you self-publish for sure.
Yeah, and if
Um,
you were to self-publish, how would you go about that? Like, just for perspective, not that it really matters that much, but you've got about 2,000 plus followers on Twitter, and you've got about 1,000 plus followers on LinkedIn.
mhm. Yeah, so self-publishing, I mean, it's really easy. You build like a PDF of your book, and then you use a site like Gumroad or one of these to sell it. I shouldn't say it's easy. You still got to write the content and
Yeah,
format the book and all
but the
that.
actual like distribution aspect, you don't
Yeah,
have people providing technical reviews. Do you get a friend to technical review it? Do you just talk to an LLM, see if it catches typos? Like, how would you
that's
go
true
about
too.
doing that if you wanted to self-publish a book?
I I think probably now I probably would leverage an LLM at least to a certain point to try to check some of this stuff. Is this paragraph, is this accurate? And but I would still then I would double check what it says, because it might say, oh yeah, that's this isn't right because this actually means this, and I look it up and it's like invalid CSS syntax for
Yeah,
something, which can still happen. So I think it's a tool in the toolbox, but it's not the whole package
yeah,
yet.
100%.
Keep saying yet, but
Yeah, yeah, and it will be interesting to see what happens. Again,
yeah, for
I
sure.
I remain not completely convinced that we're gonna have the equivalent of Mark Twain, like in Star Trek, like Mark Twain hanging out with you, or Leonardo da Vinci hanging out with you, giving you advice and stuff like that. Like in
Yeah, we're a
Voyager,
long way from that.
she always goes and talks to Leonardo da Vinci on the holodeck, right?
Oh yeah.
But I guess with your current lifestyle of publishing books every few years and continuing to work as a software engineer, continue to occasionally build open source software, like where do you see the next few years of your career, assuming AI doesn't completely upend everything? Like where do you think you'll be 20 years from now?
Well, one thing I'm trying to plan for now is try to maybe look at a more like architect type role in the future. I mean, what would be really nice is like a niche, like a UI architect, which is because UI is really my strong point. Um, which sometimes I wonder why haven't I done that already? Because I know people that are architects that are way younger than me with way fewer years of experience. But everybody's journey is different, and you're not going to all get there at the same time. But I think that's probably a direction I would like to go. I would still like to be able to write some code though.
Yeah. And how do you think you would go about getting to architect level?
Well, for in my case, I think one of the mistakes that I've made over these past couple decades is I've focused way too much on the technical skills and the code and like make that my focus. I think soft skills, communication, kind of business know-how to a certain degree. I think these are all things that I need to really work on before I'm ready for a role like that. Leadership type skills, which, as I mentioned, haven't managed anybody yet, so I don't really have the leadership skills maybe that some others might have at this point. So
Yeah. What role do you think conferences play? Do you go to very many conferences, or have you in the past?
I've gone to a few. I'd like to go to more, but I think that I mean, I don't know. For me, anyways, they've just reinforced learning the technical stuff. I've gone to some talks in the past that are less technical, but I haven't gotten much kind of soft skills type of content from conference talks that I've seen so far, and I'm sure they're out there. I probably just tend to gravitate more towards the more technical topics. I think I need to break out of my comfort zone more
Yeah.
of that aspect.
Aside from work and being this identity, this software engineering hat that you wear during the day
Mhm.
when you're writing books, when you're working on open source, when you're working at your day job, you do have other aspects. It's not like you're just like an android that like powers down as soon as the job is
No,
done, right?
no,
You go home and you do other stuff. I want to talk a
yeah.
little bit about that. And one of my goals in talking about this is seeing whether there are potential ways that you can laterally like use your hobbies and other things like that to as a potential vector for meeting additional people outside of just what you said, like purely like people focused on security software, or people focused on
Right.
a lot of things you're focused on. But maybe you can talk about what you spend the other 100+ hours of your week doing that you're not working.
Well, usually right after, the hours after work is family time. Usually, so that's when I get to spend the most time with my son. And once he goes to bed, and once everyone else is in bed, usually it's gaming time. That's like I said, that's probably my biggest hobby outside of software development is gaming. I've always been since I was in like middle school or even younger. I kind of took a break the first few years as my son was born. I just didn't have time for it. But then I came out of retirement and do a lot of that. Um, I also like a lot of like kind of tabletop gaming. I'm actually
Mm-hmm.
gonna be starting a D&D campaign with some friends in a couple
Very
of weeks. I'm
cool.
looking forward to that. Yeah, I haven't done it in so long, so that should be cool. But yeah, that's the main thing. I like to read a lot, sci-fi, fantasy, especially. Kind of my other when I want to need to escape from the world. That's sometimes what I do.
Yeah. So you've got knowledge of video games. You've got knowledge of tabletop games. You've got knowledge of software development. Has it ever occurred to you, man, I mean, you're a writer. Have you ever thought about building a game?
I have thought about that, to be honest, and I never could think of a good idea for a game that I think would be interesting enough to do. But I'll never say never about that because if I could think of a cool game idea with some cool game mechanics, even though I don't have much of a background, any background really in game development, I think working with an LLM, I could probably do something. I mean, look at what people are turning out just vibe coding these games now. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
If ever there was a time to try it, maybe now would be a good time.
Yeah. Well, the tools for developing games are pretty powerful. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, like there's this game Hotline Miami that
Oh, that game's
was,
great. Oh yeah.
yeah, and it was built in like some sort of like game maker studio or something, like some
Oh, was it
commercial
really? Oh,
tool.
okay.
Yeah, and I was
Oh,
like, oh, that's
cool.
crazy. And that, like, now imagine like what an indie dev could do with something like Unreal Engine or something like that, right? Or
Oh yeah, totally.
Unity or something. Yeah. So the tools have progressed. We publish tons of tutorials on game development on the
Oh,
Free
really?
Code
I'll
Camp
have to
YouTube
check that
channel.
out.
But again, like, what is the game's supposed to be like? Have you ever thought like, oh, I'm just gonna like build like a JRPG, or I'm gonna build like an interactive Dungeons and Dragons type game, or even like a roguelike dungeon crawler type game or something like that? I mean, it feels like there are these defined genres, these
Yeah,
forms that you can play with essentially.
I think I would if I were to build a game, I would probably want to do some kind of a story-driven RPG type game because that's, other than first-person shooters, that's probably my favorite other type of genre.
Yeah.
I've been playing a lot of Assassin's Creed games and the newer ones that have the more RPG aspects, and I've thought that's really fun. Although I'm not always the best at those types of games, but I do enjoy them.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your D&D group, because this is a huge phenomenon. Tons of people, especially during the pandemic, D&D got really popular, and people were playing it like remotely through like, video. Do you actually meet with people in and around the Boston metro area? You get together like around a big table and play?
Well, in the game the campaign we have coming up, we're going to do it virtually,
Okay.
because one of the guys is in like Pittsburgh, I think. But I've done that in the past. Actually, when I was in high school, this is going way back, there was like a gaming store in my hometown that we would go and we did a D&D campaign there. We would play like Axis and Allies, and it was awesome. They had computers you could rent time on, play Warcraft 2. It was the best. But
What was the name of the store? Do you remember?
Paradox Books, it was called.
Paradox Books. Very cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like those local game stores, LGS. Yeah. Have you been to any of those types of places recently?
I haven't in a long time, and I know there are a lot of groups in the Boston area that do tabletop gaming and stuff. And that might be something cool to look into. And actually, get away from the computer screen and do something with real people.
Yeah, MIT has a board game night, and I went and I just hung out like I don't know, like 10 years ago, 12 years
Oh, cool.
ago, and I just maybe it was like 15 years ago. It was a long ass time ago, but basically I went there and I just sat out and like played this game through the ages with a bunch of really smart people, and it was pretty chill. Like they didn't care that I
That
wasn't a
sounds
student or
awesome.
anything. Yeah.
That's
So
cool.
pro tip: Boston's awesome. Don't Another pro tip: don't go in the winter. Um,
Yeah.
and then unless you really really like snow and cold. But yeah, like that. Shout out to the MIT Board Game Club for welcoming me and letting me hang out with them for the night. Um, Tabletop gaming is a great way to build social connections and not stare at a rectangle all day.
Yes.
Which yeah, which no shade to people who want to play video games, but there is definitely something to be said for just sitting, talking, having like
It's a lot more
literal
fun for sure.
physical paper and figurines and stuff like that, and moving
Oh
those
yeah.
around. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, we used to play. I don't know if you ever played the game Imperial Assault, but it's a board game with miniatures, and we would play that all the time. We used to go with
yeah.
a group. We would play at the Red Hat office that was near my house, and we'd be there till like 2 in the morning playing. It was great.
What is it do you think that draws so many would-be software engineers to tabletop gaming, and why do you think it is that so many tabletop gaming enthusiasts ultimately go into like engineering?
Well, think there's a lot of kind of parallels, as far as like planning and strategizing. You have to really understand sometimes very technical game mechanics. And I think that if you have that kind of a mind that understands that kind of stuff, that you could also apply it to things like building software or building games of your own. Um, some of these games, as you know, are really have complicated rule sets, and I think it attracts a certain type of person, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I've really enjoyed talking with you, and I have a one final question for you. That is like, so right now you're pretty successful. You providing for your family. You're doing meaningful work. You're publishing books, working on open source. You're kind of living the dream. I think a lot of people would love to be where you are right now, Joe, and living in a really cool city. Yeah, like being able to experiment with new tech as it comes down the pipes. Uh, but maybe there are some other things that like you could be even further along than you are now. And I want to take this opportunity for you to like send a little time capsule back to yourself when you were in high school. Maybe you're like trying to figure out what to do, what to prioritize. Like, what advice would you send back to yourself, 23 years ago?
Well, I don't know about high school. I don't know how much actionable advice I could give to high school age me, but I would definitely say to myself, at least earlier in my career, because another mistake I made is I find a mentor, because I never did that, and I think that held me back from a lot of growth too. I didn't have a mentor figure that taught me the ropes of some of this stuff. I had to kind of figure it out on my own, which took longer. Um, but I would also say, I guess, be more well-rounded. Maybe don't just focus so much on coding all the time. Learn about business, learn about life, that kind of stuff to me. And maybe if I did that, I'd already be in an architect position, or maybe I'd have started a SaaS and be filthy rich now. Who knows?
Yeah.
um, but I think those are the two main pieces of advice I would give myself. I mean, in general, I think things were on a pretty good trajectory in my high school days. I
Yeah.
think.
And in terms of mentorship, just tiny follow up question. Uh, have you gotten any sort of mentorship since, or like maybe not formally called mentorship, but like somebody that you've worked with closely who's helped you, or have you turned around and helped somebody else in such a capacity?
I mean, I haven't been a formal kind of mentor to anybody. I've definitely taken that kind of a role, I think, with some people. I never really did, even in the later years, have somebody for me to look up to kind of help me with some of that stuff. It is hard because it's sometimes that has to happen organically, and it just doesn't happen sometimes for some people. Um, but it is one of my regrets that I never did have that type of relationship with somebody to help me grow. But I think now helping more junior people is still been helpful to me. It helps reinforce a certain skill set also, because that's more soft skills, I guess you could say. The kind of human aspect of it. That's something I'm still trying to learn more and get better at for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Final question. That uncle
Yes.
you mentioned earlier who proved such like a pivotal role in like giving you something to aspire to and
Yes.
getting you interested in technology. Is he still alive?
Yes, he is.
What's his name?
Mark Robert.
Mark Robert. Well, if you're tuning into this, thanks for everything you've done to be a
Thanks,
positive
Uncle Mark.
influence. Yeah, in Joe's life. And may everybody be so fortunate to have an Uncle Mark in their lives or to serve as somebody like Uncle Mark for the
The next
kids in the
generation.
fam,
Yes.
right? Yeah, that's what it's all about. Well,
Totally.
Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, learning from you, and
Thank you so
best of
much.
luck
I've had
with
a
your
lot of
upcoming
fun.
book.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
And
Until
keep
next
doing
week,
what you're
everybody.
doing.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. We're not going anywhere. FreeCodeCamp is going to be
Good.
here. We're going to keep cranking out these
Great
open
stuff.
learning resources for everyone. Again, if you want to support FreeCodeCamp's mission, consider becoming one of the super chill people who support us through a monthly donation. Joe, thanks again for coming on, man.
Thank you. I really had a great time. Thank you.
Yeah, and until next week, everybody, happy coding.
Happy coding.